And in other developments, voters are encouraged to use the remaining days ahead of the elections to reflect on well-intentioned promises versus practical solutions aimed at reform. One of the areas that has been identified as seeking urgent attention to address is unemployment, as well as the skilling of the country's youth in education. CEO at Idea Digital Education, Dr. Corrin Varady, speaks to us about this development. Thank you so much for your time and patience. Of course, in South Africa, when we speak of reform in the education system, we then have to look at the current climate. How does that translate into the employment outcomes that we are seeing as negative?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really important thing that we don't consider business as usual in the education space as we go into these elections. And we need to be making key decisions around what does the future of our workforce and generations of young people going to look like. Certainly the tie between even, say, a grade 4 student and what our youth unemployment figures are going to be over the next 15 years as they come into the labor force is really important. So whatever we do in the basic education space, we must realize that it has a knock-on effect in terms of our unemployment figures, and certainly in terms of building skills for our team and for our generations that are going to be globally competitive and relevant to the markets as we see different industries and digital industries taking place.
So post the elections with a new administration, how should they tackle that, especially because policy is there, however, we are not seeing the sought results?
Yeah, I think policy we're often very good at. The execution or the delivery of our education system is where we're challenged. So I think post-elections, we need to be looking at what are the key areas and how do we deliver on these? Because we've used a lot of excuses, whether that's budget austerity measures, or it may be that there's such a complex issue that we try and look for simple fixes like the building of schools and infrastructure to kind of maybe whitewash the data in terms of how our students are doing. But our matric results are clearly an indication or a litmus test that we're not really achieving at the rates that we should be. We have to look at where all of our political parties, our district models as well, at a granular level can work together so that we know and understand how we're going to find points of harmony. And certainly we need to be looking at the skills that we should be developing in our young people, particularly around technology and digital economy skills, because we're heading, I mean, if not already in this sort of fourth industrial revolution, we're heading into even more advanced technology influence in our industries. And I just don't think that all the political parties are taking that on in their manifestos. They're certainly looking for kind of broad brush strokes of how we're going to transform education, but not really looking at how we're going to do that in a constrained climate.
On the latter part of your statement, it was quite heartbreaking to watch during COVID-19 that a continuation of inequality existed when you speak of the fourth industrial revolution, as well as the digitization of the education system. It meant that there was a barrier of entry for some who do not have the resources as well as the infrastructure that just simply does not exist in example, rural areas as well as in townships. How then do we talk about turnaround times for implementing such for a new government?
You have to have appetite for these things. And I think the challenge is that there is this mindset that technology and certainly the democratization of quality education using technology is for those who come from socioeconomic higher levels or high income levels. It's simply not true. We can reduce that digital divide if we want to. The problem that we're having at the moment is that when we think of government schools and large mass delivery of universal education, we really do think of a building and constrained and overwhelmed teachers. So we're not looking at how do we actually turn that model around? How do we see that technology is a much lower cost resource that we can deploy across our schools and our provinces to deliver that gap that we're seeing in the government school space compared to the private school space? How do we use it as a tool and not necessarily as a weapon where we politicize this? The ministers often called these gadgets and often talked about how internet is a major issue. Well, we're seeing that those gaps are closing when it comes to connectivity and to hardware. We now need to be looking at how do we support our teachers to deliver these programs better, and how do we make resources more openly available? Because really, if equality is at the heart of what we're trying to deliver, technology is probably the least discriminatory manner of us doing that. And particularly that will help us to sort of even the playing field when it comes to public and private education in this country.
Lastly, where does the private sector fit in, especially when you think of it in a manner of what it is that private business is looking for in a political leadership for them to invest essentially at a domestic level? Because this is going to be a big ticket item for a country with many socio-economic needs budgetary-wise.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because we ask ourselves that all the time. Well, what is our role in this sort of enforced public-private partnership model that we're told is always enriched by government? And you know, we've got to be very careful because there is a politicization of education, and us as private sector get drawn into that dialogue. So whether or not we're talking about D or ANC controlled areas, it's irrelevant to us. Actually, in both spaces, PPP is not working effectively. What we would be looking for is how can we better work with government to see outcomes be achieved? How can we actually reform and look at faster and expedited relationships and innovation relationships between both private sector and public sector? At the moment, they're not effective. And so what's happening is we've got mass resources being deployed in public sector. I don't think they're being used particularly well, and yet then we're claiming that there's not enough funding going towards education. Frankly, the education budgets have gone up, so we should be seeing a proportionate increase in our outcomes. It's really going to come down to how do we manage our spending, and how does private sector actually play a role so that we do get foreign investment of both ideas and of innovations in this country. Hopefully stability will come about, and the concept of budget austerity when it comes to the education budget can be removed so that private sector has incentives to work with the government.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Dr. Corrin Varady is CEO at IDEA, talking to us in this segment of the Ballot Brief's Business Desk Input, talking around how the digitization of education can be used for progress with regards to economic policies post the 2024 elections. That's